The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Silver Creek, Montana, as Olivia Blackwood's hands trembled over her father's ledger. Spring of 1876 had arrived with more cruelty than promise, leaving her alone with a mercantile store drowning in debt and not a soul she could truly call family. At 22, she had read enough dime novels to know that life in the West rarely offered happy endings for women like her practical, plain-speaking daughters of shopkeepers with more education than marriage prospects. Miss Blackwood, the town's banker, Mr. Whitfield, cleared his throat from the doorway of the small room behind the shop where she kept the accounts. I don't mean to intrude on your grief, but it's been 3 weeks since your father's passing. We need to discuss the outstanding loans. Olivia tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and squared her shoulders. I'm aware of our situation, Mr. Whitfield. I've been reviewing the ledgers all morning. Then you understand that without immediate payment, I'll have no choice but to foreclose. His round spectacles caught the midday light as he shifted uncomfortably. Your father was a good man, but business is business. 2 months, she countered, rising to her full height, which still left her a head shorter than the banker. Give me 2 months to turn things around. The spring supply trains will be arriving soon. Whitfield's lips thinned to a line beneath his mustache. 1 month, Miss Blackwood. That's all I can offer. He tipped his hat and retreated, the bell above the shop door announcing his departure. Olivia sank back into her chair, the weight of reality pressing down on her shoulders. Her father's mercantile had been the heart of Silver Creek for 15 years, but his gambling debts had slowly bled it dry. Now she was left with shelves half empty and a strongbox that held little more than dust. The leather-bound copy of Wuthering Heights on her desk seemed to mock her with its romantic notions. How many nights had she spent lost in stories of passionate love and daring heroes? Stories that had nothing to do with the harsh reality of frontier life. Foolish girl, she murmured to herself, closing the ledger with a decisive snap. She needed more than dreams now. She needed a miracle. The next morning broke crisp and clear, the Montana sky stretching endless blue above the small cluster of buildings that made up Silver Creek. Olivia had spent the night taking inventory and forming a plan that felt as fragile as spider silk, but it was all she had. She was rearranging the depleted shelves when the bell above the door jangled. A tall figure silhouetted against the morning light, bringing with him the scent of horses and open country. We're not officially open yet, she called, not turning from her task of organizing the few remaining cans of peaches. Apologies, madam. I can come back. Something in his voice, a low, measured tone with the faintest hint of a southern drawl, made her turn. The man standing in her doorway was not one of the local ranchers or miners she knew by sight. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, dusty trail clothes, and a Stetson pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of summer storm clouds. No, it's fine, she found herself saying. What can I help you with, Mr. Stone? Samuel Stone. He removed his hat completely, revealing the full impact of those eyes. Just looking for supplies. Trail rations, ammunition, maybe some coffee if you have it. Olivia gestured to the meager shelves. As you can see, our selection is limited at present. The spring shipments haven't arrived yet. She didn't mention that she had no money to pay for those shipments when they did come. Samuel Stone's gaze swept the store with the careful assessment of a man who noticed details. Tough times. Nothing unusual for frontier business, she replied stiffly, pride keeping her spine straight despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. I do have coffee and some jerky that's fresh made. He nodded, moving further into the store with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. That'll do fine, and perhaps some information if you're willing to sell that too. Information isn't priced on my shelves, Mr. Stone, but I'm happy to help if I can. She moved behind the counter, reaching for the coffee beans. I'm looking for work. Heard the Rocking S Ranch might be hiring hands for the spring drive. Olivia measured coffee into a paper sack. The Rocking S is about 20 miles north of here. Mr. Stewart is a fair employer, from what I hear, though he drives a hard bargain. And you are? His question was direct but not impolite. Olivia Blackwood, this was my father's store. The past tense felt like gravel in her mouth. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. My condolences, Miss Blackwood. Thank you. She wrapped the jerky and placed it beside the coffee. That'll be 85 cents. He placed $1 on the counter. Keep the change. I don't need charity, Mr. Stone. She pushed the extra 15 cents toward him. A smile touched the corner of his mouth, transforming his stern features. Not charity. Investment. I suspect I'll be coming back for more supplies. Their fingers brushed as she handed him his purchases, and for an inexplicable moment, Olivia felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the static electricity in the dry air. She pulled her hand back quickly. Good luck at the Rocking S, she said, retreating behind the professional courtesy she maintained with all customers. Samuel Stone settled his hat back on his head with a nod. Much obliged, Miss Blackwood. He paused at the door. You know, sometimes what looks like the end turns out to be just the beginning. Before she could respond to such an unexpected philosophical observation, he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of leather and something indefinable that reminded her of thunderstorms. Olivia shook her head, dismissing the brief encounter from her mind. One handsome drifter wasn't going to solve her problems. She had a store to save and exactly 29 days to do it. The following week passed in a blur of anxiety and determination. Olivia wrote letters to suppliers, offering partial payments and promises of future business. She cleaned every corner of the store, rearranged what merchandise remained to hide the gaps on the shelves, and even pulled some of her mother's old quilts from storage to sell. On Saturday evening, as she was closing up, Mayor Jenkins's wife bustled in with her ever-present air of self-importance. Olivia, dear, I've just heard the most distressing news. Martha Jenkins removed her gloves one finger at a time. Mr. Whitfield mentioned at the church social that you might be closing the mercantile. We simply cannot allow that to happen. Olivia bit back her irritation at the banker's indiscretion. I'm doing everything possible to keep the store open, Mrs. Jenkins. Of course you are, dear. Martha patted her hand with patronizing sympathy. But a young woman alone, it's not proper, not safe. Have you considered Mr. Peterson's offer? He's a widower, yes, and perhaps a bit mature, but he has a secure position at the mining company. Olivia's stomach turned at the mention of Edgar Peterson, a man 30 years her senior who had been eyeing her since her 18th birthday. I'm focused on saving my father's business, not on marriage proposals. Martha clicked her tongue. Pride is a luxury, my dear. Women in the West can't afford to be choosy. Is there something specific you needed from the store today, Mrs. Jenkins? Olivia asked, deliberately changing the subject. Martha sighed dramatically. Just some tea if you have it, and perhaps some of that peppermint candy for the church children. As Olivia wrapped her purchases, Martha continued with town gossip, most of which Olivia ignored until a familiar name caught her attention. And this Samuel Stone character has been asking questions all over town. About your father, of all things. Very suspicious, if you ask me. Olivia's hand stilled over the paper package. What sort of questions? about his debts, his last days, even asked Dr. Miller about the circumstances of his death. Martha leaned forward, her eyes alight with the thrill of sharing potentially scandalous information. They say he's no ordinary ranch hand, too educated, too well-spoken. I heard Sheriff Davis say he might be a Pinkerton man. Olivia's mind raced. Why would a detective be interested in her father? Harold Blackwood had been many things: a dreamer, a risk-taker, occasionally a fool with money, but never a criminal. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Well, be careful, dear. Men like that bring trouble." Martha paid for her purchases and departed with a flutter of skirts and ominous warnings. Olivia locked the door behind her, troubled by this new information. If Samuel Stone was investigating her father, what did that mean for her already precarious situation? Her answer came sooner than expected. The next morning, as she was opening the store, she found him waiting on the boardwalk, looking as if he'd been up since dawn. "Mr. Stone," she acknowledged coolly, "I understand you've been asking questions about my father." He didn't seem surprised by her directness. "May I come in, Miss Blackwood? I believe we need to talk." She hesitated, then nodded, unlocking the door and preceding him into the still shadowed interior of the mercantile. The morning sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between them. "I'm not a Pinkerton, if that's what you're wondering," he said, setting his hat on the counter. "Though I understand that's the rumor." "Then what are you, Mr. Stone? Because ranch hands don't typically investigate the deaths of small-town merchants." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm looking for a man named James Harrington. He partnered with your father in a mining venture about 6 months ago. Does the name mean anything to you?" Olivia frowned, thinking back. "There was someone. My father mentioned a new investor, but I never met him." "That's because James Harrington doesn't exist." Samuel's expression hardened. "The man who used that name is a con artist who's fleeced dozens of people across 3 territories. Your father was his latest victim." The revelation struck Olivia like a physical blow. "You're saying my father was swindled?" "Yes, and I've been tracking this man for nearly a year. Your father's correspondence with him led me here." Olivia sank onto a nearby stool, her mind reeling. "My father wasn't a gambler, was he? Those weren't gambling debts that drained the store's accounts." "No, Miss Blackwood. Your father thought he was investing in a legitimate silver claim. He was deceived by an expert." A complex mixture of emotions washed over her relief that her father hadn't been recklessly gambling away their livelihood. Anger at being deceived about the nature of their financial troubles, and a strange sense of vindication. Harold Blackwood had been many things, but in his final months, he'd been trying to secure his daughter's future, not squander it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, studying Samuel's face for clues to his motivation. "Because I need your help." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "This is the last letter your father received from Harrington. The postmark is from Timber Creek, but I believe the man may still be in this area, possibly operating under a new identity. I need to know if you've seen him, or if anyone new has come to town in the past month." Olivia unfolded the letter and examined the signature at the bottom. The handwriting triggered a memory. "This looks familiar, but I can't place where I've seen it." "Take your time. Any information could help." She looked up at him with renewed suspicion. "You still haven't told me who you are, Mr. Stone, or why you're tracking this man." Something shifted in his expression, a momentary glimpse of raw emotion quickly contained. "My sister invested everything she had in one of his schemes." When she discovered the fraud, she confronted him. Samuel's jaw tightened. "She didn't survive the encounter. The law in Arizona territory couldn't or wouldn't pursue him across state lines, so I took up the trail. You're seeking revenge, Olivia said softly, understanding dawning. Justice, he corrected, though the steel in his voice suggested the line between the two concepts was razor-thin in his mind. And to recover what he's stolen if possible, including my father's money, if I can. Olivia stood, smoothing her skirts with suddenly shaky hands. This unexpected development offered a glimmer of hope she scarcely dared acknowledge. If there was even a chance of recovering the money her father had lost, she might be able to save the store. I'll help you, Mr. Stone, she decided, but I have conditions. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something that might have been admiration. Name them. First, complete honesty between us. No more half-truths or omissions, he nodded. Fair enough. Second, if we recover any of my father's money, it stays with me, all of it. I have no interest in your father's funds, Miss Blackwood. My concern is apprehending the man responsible. And third, she continued, meeting his gaze steadily, this arrangement remains between us. Silver Creek thrives on gossip, and I can't afford to have my reputation compromised by associating too closely with a stranger. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Concerned about appearances, Miss Blackwood. Concerned about survival, Mr. Stone. A woman alone in a town like this walks a narrow line between independence and ostracism. I intend to maintain the former without risking the latter. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. Your terms are acceptable. Shall we shake on it? Olivia extended her hand, and his larger one enveloped it. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip firm without being crushing. For the second time, she felt that inexplicable jolt of awareness at his touch, and from the slight widening of his eyes, she suspected he felt it too. Partners, then, she said, withdrawing her hand perhaps too quickly. Partners, he agreed. Now about that letter. For the next hour they sat at her father's desk behind the store, combing through correspondence and ledgers. Olivia found herself telling Samuel about her father, his dreams, his kindness, his inability to see deceit in others while they searched for clues to the con man's identity. He always believed the best of people, she said, a fond sadness coloring her voice. Mother was the practical one. After she died of fever 5 years ago, he seemed to lose his anchor to reality, started chasing bigger dreams, taking bigger risks. Some might say that's the spirit of the West, Samuel observed, examining a receipt. The dreamers who see possibility where others see only emptiness. Perhaps. But dreams don't put food on the table or keep the bank from foreclosing. She sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. Sometimes I think I was born without that dreamer's spirit. I've always been too practical, too grounded. Samuel looked up, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. There's value in being grounded, Miss Blackwood. Dreamers need someone to keep them tethered to earth, or they might float away entirely. Something in his tone made her wonder if he spoke from personal experience. Before she could pursue the thought, her attention caught on a business card tucked between the pages of the ledger. Wait. She pulled it out, examining the elegant script. This handwriting matches the letter. Theodore Wellington, investment broker. She looked up at Samuel. I remember now. He came to town about 7 months ago. Very distinguished looking, with silver hair and spectacles. He took rooms at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house for nearly a month. Samuel took the card, his expression intensifying. That's him. Different name, but I'd bet my last dollar it's our man. Did he interact with anyone else in town? Olivia thought back. He was quite sociable. Attended church, dined at the hotel restaurant. He was particularly friendly with Mayor Jenkins and some of the town council members. Her eyes widened with realization. He was laying groundwork, establishing credibility before approaching potential marks. Smart, Samuel muttered. And effective. Did he leave town abruptly? Yes, about a month before my father's health began to decline. He mentioned business in Helena but promised to return. She frowned. Several people were disappointed when he didn't. I think Mrs. Abernathy had hopes he might court her widowed daughter. Samuel nodded grimly. That fits his pattern. He stays long enough to establish trust, then disappears once he has what he wants. He pocketed the business card. This is helpful, Miss Blackwood. With this description and name, I can start making inquiries in the surrounding towns. The bell above the shop door jingled, signaling a customer. Olivia rose quickly. I should attend to that. Will you be staying in town? For another day or two. I've taken a room at the hotel. Come back tomorrow morning before the store opens. We can continue our discussion then. He stood, towering over her in the small office space. For a moment, they were close enough that she could see the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow and catch the scent of saddle leather and shaving soap that clung to him. Until tomorrow, then, he said softly, reaching for his hat. And Miss Blackwood, thank you. The simple sincerity in those two words affected her more than it should have. You're welcome, Mr. Stone. As she watched him slip out the back door, Olivia was struck by the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a shopkeeper's daughter facing financial ruin. Now she was partnered with a dangerous, compelling stranger on a quest for justice that might save her future. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, beneath the anxiety and uncertainty, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father fell ill. Hope. The next few days established a pattern. Samuel would arrive at the mercantile before opening hours, and they would spend an hour reviewing information and planning their next steps. He had begun making discreet inquiries in neighboring settlements, looking for any sign of Theodore Wellington or James Harrington, or whatever name the confidence man might be using now. On the fourth morning, Samuel arrived with news. I found him, he announced without preamble as Olivia let him in through the back door. Or at least, I found his trail. He's in Cottonwood, about 40 miles east of here, calling himself William Thornton and claiming to represent Eastern investors in the railroad. Excitement and trepidation mingled in Olivia's chest. Are you certain it's the same man? Silver hair, gold spectacles, charming manner, staying at the best hotel in town. The description matches. And he's been asking about mining interests and land speculation, his usual hunting grounds. What will you do? Samuel's expression hardened. Ride to Cottonwood, confront him, recover what I can of his ill-gotten gains. And then, he met her gaze directly. Turn him over to the law. I want justice, Miss Blackwood, not vengeance, though I won't deny I've contemplated the latter. Olivia studied him, sensing there was more to his plan than he was revealing. You're going alone. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when he swindled my father and left me with a failing business. She squared her shoulders. I'm coming with you. Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's out of the question. It could be dangerous. I'm not asking for permission, Mr. Stone. If you're confronting the man who cheated my father, I intend to be present. Miss Blackwood, Olivia, she corrected him. If we're riding 40 miles together, I think we can dispense with some formalities. A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Olivia, then. But my answer is still no. This man is dangerous. He's already killed once that I know of. Which is precisely why you shouldn't face him alone. She crossed her arms, unwavering. Besides, my presence could be an advantage. He won't be expecting a woman, especially not one he's never met. I could approach him without raising suspicion. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated by her persistence. And what about your store? You can't simply abandon it for several days. Mrs. Tolliver's daughter Jenny is 16 and perfectly capable of minding the counter for a few days. I'll pay her from whatever we recover." She lifted her chin. "I'm going, Samuel, either with your cooperation or without it." For a long moment they engaged in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Samuel exhaled sharply. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I prefer determined," she replied with the faintest smile. "When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow. Do you ride?" "I grew up in Montana Territory, Mr. Stone. Of course I ride." "Sam," he said quietly, "if we're dispensing with formalities—" "Sam," she repeated, the single syllable feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Pack light, wear practical clothing, and be prepared for a hard journey. I'll be ready." After he left, Olivia stood motionless in the empty store, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was about to embark on an adventure more daring than any she had read about in her cherished novels. The practical part of her mind whispered that she was being reckless, that proper young women didn't chase confidence men across the territory with handsome strangers. But for once, Olivia Blackwood chose not to listen to that practical voice. Instead, she went upstairs to her small apartment and began to pack. Dawn was just breaking when Olivia met Samuel at the livery stable. She had left detailed instructions with Jenny Tolliver, packed a small saddlebag with essentials, and worn her most practical riding outfit, a divided skirt that her mother had made for her years ago, a sturdy shirtwaist, and a leather vest that had belonged to her father. Her hair was braided and pinned securely beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Samuel was already saddling 2 horses, his own massive black gelding, and a smaller, dun-colored mare that belonged to the livery. "I've arranged to borrow Daisy for you," he said by way of greeting. "She's steady and has good endurance." Olivia approached the mare, stroking her velvet nose. "She'll do nicely, thank you." "You still have time to change your mind," Samuel offered, tightening the cinch on his saddle. "You really believe that's likely?" A reluctant smile crossed his face. "No, but I felt obliged to make the offer." He finished with the horses and turned to face her fully. In the pale light of dawn, his features seemed both harder and more vulnerable. "This won't be like your novels, Olivia. The trail is hard, the days are long, and there's no guarantee of a happy ending." She met his gaze steadily. "I stopped believing in happy endings when my mother died. I'm not coming for some romantic adventure, Sam. I'm coming because my father was wronged and I want to see justice done." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Then let's ride. We've got a long day ahead." They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, taking the main road east, before turning onto a less traveled trail that Samuel said would shave hours off their journey. The day warmed quickly, and Olivia was grateful for her practical attire as they maintained a steady pace through rolling grasslands and scattered pine forests. Samuel proved to be a quiet traveling companion, alert to their surroundings but not inclined to idle conversation. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horses by a small creek, Olivia's muscles were protesting the unaccustomed activity, though she was determined not to complain. "You ride well," Samuel observed as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "Not many town women would be keeping up at this pace. My father taught me when I was young. We used to ride out to the homesteads to deliver goods before the store became established enough for people to come to us." She stretched discreetly, trying to ease the ache in her back. "Though I admit it's been some time since I've spent this many hours in the saddle. We'll stop earlier than planned today," he decided. "No sense pushing too hard and being unable to continue tomorrow." Olivia wanted to protest, but knew he was right. Tell me more about this man we're pursuing. What makes him so effective at his confidence games? Samuel's expression darkened. He's educated, articulate, and has an uncanny ability to sense what people want most. With your father, it was likely the dream of providing security for you. With my sister. He paused, pain flashing across his features. Sarah was a teacher, unmarried, supporting herself. She wanted to open a school of her own someday. He convinced her that investing with him was her only chance to achieve that dream. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly. She must have been remarkable. She was. Samuel's gaze drifted to the distant horizon. Brave, intelligent, stubborn as the day is long, you remind me of her sometimes. The unexpected comparison warmed Olivia in a way she didn't quite understand. What about you? What did you do before you began tracking this man? I worked cattle mostly, did some scouting for the army during the war, tried my hand at prospecting for a while, he shrugged. A jack of all trades, master of none, my father would have said. And now I have one purpose. The steel was back in his voice. Finding the man who calls himself Theodore Wellington and making him pay for what he's done. And after that, Olivia asked, genuinely curious about what drove this complex man. Samuel looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if he hadn't considered life beyond his current mission. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Something about his confession made Olivia's heart ache. This man had put his entire life on hold for the sake of justice or revenge, or perhaps both. What would be left for him when his quest was complete? They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain growing more rugged as they followed the meandering path eastward. By evening, they had reached a small clearing beside a stream, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. We'll camp here, Samuel decided, dismounting and reaching up to help Olivia from her saddle. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her down, and for a breathless moment, they stood close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, and the day's stubble darkening his jaw. Something flickered in his expression, awareness, perhaps, or some deeper emotion she couldn't name before he stepped back, releasing her. I'll tend to the horses if you'd like to gather wood for a fire, he suggested, his voice slightly rougher than before. Olivia nodded, grateful for the task that would allow her to put some distance between them and regain her composure. The physical awareness she felt in Samuel's presence was unsettling, not unpleasant, but definitely unexpected. She had never been the type of woman to lose her head over a handsome face or broad shoulders. Yet there was something about Samuel Stone that affected her in ways she couldn't quite rationalize. Perhaps it was his quiet competence, or the glimpses of vulnerability beneath his hard exterior. Or maybe it was simply that he was the first man who had treated her as a capable partner, rather than a helpless female in need of protection or guidance. Whatever the reason, Olivia found herself stealing glances at him as they prepared their simple camp. He moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the trail, setting up a small fire, preparing coffee in a battered tin pot, and producing strips of dried venison and biscuits from his saddlebags. As darkness fell, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the empty landscape. "Why did you really come with me, Olivia?" Samuel asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. The truth. She looked up, startled by the directness of his question. "I told you for justice. There's more to it than that." His eyes reflected the firelight, intense and searching. Most women would have been content to let a man handle this business. Olivia considered deflecting but found herself wanting to offer honesty instead. All my life, I've been the practical one, the responsible one, the one who keeps accounts and orders inventory and makes sensible decisions. Even my father, who loved me dearly, saw me as his reliable support rather than a person with dreams of my own. She poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise toward the stars. When you told me about this man, about what he did to my father, I realized I had a choice. I could stay in Silver Creek, mind my store, and perhaps eventually marry some respectable widower like Mr. Peterson, who wants a practical wife to raise his children. Samuel's expression tightened at the mention of Peterson, though he remained silent. Or, she continued, I could do something unexpected, something that my practical self would never approve of. I could seek justice with my own hands, see more of the world than just Silver Creek, and for once in my life, be something other than sensible Olivia Blackwood, the shopkeeper's dutiful daughter. She met his gaze across the flames. So yes, I came for justice, but I also came for myself. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And what have you found so far, on this journey for yourself? A smile tugged at her lips. Saddle soreness, dust in my teeth, coffee that could strip paint. Then, more seriously, and a kind of freedom I've never known before. Something in his face softened, and for a moment, Olivia caught a glimpse of the man Samuel might have been before grief and purpose hardened him. You should get some rest, he said finally. We have another long day tomorrow. Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. She arranged her bedroll near the fire and lay down, pulling her father's old coat over her for extra warmth. Across the dying embers, she could see Samuel's profile as he sat watch, a silent sentinel against the vast wilderness surrounding them. Good night, Sam, she murmured, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Good night, Olivia, came his quiet reply. Sleep well. As she drifted into slumber, Olivia realized that, for all her reading of adventure stories and romance novels, nothing had prepared her for the reality of this journey, not just the physical hardship, but the strange intimacy of sharing a campfire and honest conversation with a man like Samuel Stone. It was nothing like the overwrought passions depicted in Wuthering Heights or the genteel courtships in Pride and Prejudice. It was something entirely different, something real and raw and entirely unexpected. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps the most interesting stories weren't found in books at all, but in the unwritten moments between two people beneath a starlit Montana sky. They reached Cottonwood shortly after noon the following day. It was larger than Silver Creek, boasting a proper hotel, 2 saloons, and even a small theater, evidence of the prosperity brought by the nearby silver mines. The main street bustled with activity. Miners coming off shift, merchants hawking wares, and well-dressed gentlemen discussing business on the boardwalks. Samuel led them to a small livery at the edge of town, where they stabled their horses. We'll take rooms at different establishments, he decided. You at the boarding house, me at the hotel, less chance of raising suspicion that way. And how do we find our quarry? Olivia asked, brushing dust from her skirts. The divided riding garment had been practical on the trail, but she'd packed a more conventional dress for their arrival in town, changing at their midday rest stop. The hotel first. If he's as consistent as I believe, he'll be staying at the finest accommodations available and making himself visible in the public areas. His prediction proved accurate. After settling Olivia at a respectable boarding house run by a garrulous widow named Mrs. Fletcher, Samuel ventured to the Grand Hotel to make inquiries. He returned to meet Olivia at a small cafe 2 hours later, his expression grim but satisfied. "He's here," he confirmed, sliding into the chair across from her. "Registered as William Thornton. Been in town about 3 weeks, making quite an impression on the local business community. Have you seen him?" Olivia kept her voice low, conscious of the other patrons nearby. From a distance, he was dining with what appeared to be several prominent citizens in the hotel restaurant. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes intent. "I've formulated a plan, but you won't like it. Tell me anyway." "He's hosting a gathering tomorrow evening in the hotel's private dining room, a presentation about investment opportunities related to the coming railroad expansion. I intend to attend." Olivia frowned. "Won't he recognize you? He's never seen me. I've been careful to stay out of his sight during my pursuit." Samuel's mouth set in a determined line. "But you're right that there's risk, which is why you'll approach him first. Me. As we discussed before, he won't suspect a woman, especially one he's never encountered before. You'll attend the gathering as a potential investor. Engage him in conversation. Express interest in his scheme. Meanwhile, I'll be watching, waiting for the right moment to confront him with evidence of his crimes." Olivia considered the plan, turning it over in her mind. It could work, but what's to prevent him from simply denying everything or fleeing when confronted? This. Samuel reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "A warrant for his arrest from Arizona territory. I've been carrying it for months. Once he's exposed, we'll bring in the local law, and my father's money." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "If he still has it, we'll recover it. If not," he hesitated, "I have resources of my own, enough to help you satisfy the bank at least." Olivia stiffened. "I told you before I don't want charity." "It's not charity," he insisted. "Consider it an advance on what's rightfully yours, to be repaid when we recover your father's funds." She wanted to refuse, to insist that she could manage on her own as she always had. But the practical part of her mind, the part she tried to silence on this journey, reminded her that the store's survival was at stake. Her pride wasn't worth the livelihoods of the people who depended on Blackwood Mercantile. "Very well," she conceded reluctantly, "but only as a loan with proper terms and interest." A hint of amusement touched Samuel's eyes. "You drive a harder bargain than most bankers I've encountered, Miss Blackwood." "I've had to," she replied simply. The amusement faded, replaced by something deeper, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "Yes, I suppose you have." They spent the remainder of the afternoon refining their plan. Samuel would secure Olivia an invitation to the investment, gathering through a carefully crafted story presented to the hotel manager. She would attend wearing her best dress, posing as a widow with a modest inheritance seeking investment opportunities. "You'll need a different name," Samuel advised, "something that won't connect you to Silver Creek or your father." "Olivia West," she decided. "My mother's maiden name." Samuel nodded approval. "Simple, easy to remember, unlikely to raise questions. Good choice." As evening approached, they parted ways, Samuel returning to the hotel to arrange Olivia's invitation, and Olivia heading back to the boarding house to prepare for her role in tomorrow's confrontation. "Be careful," Samuel cautioned as they stood on a quiet side street. "This man is perceptive and dangerous. Don't take unnecessary risks." "I could say the same to you," she replied. "Don't let your desire for justice blind you to danger." For a moment, he looked as if he might say something more, his gaze lingering on her face. Instead, he simply nodded. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he turned and walked away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering dusk. Back at the boarding house, Olivia unpacked her one good dress, a deep blue silk that had been her mother's, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. It wasn't the height of fashion, but it was elegant enough to suggest a certain level of prosperity without ostentation. As she smoothed the fabric, her mind returned to Samuel. In just a few days, he had upended her carefully ordered existence, drawing her into an adventure she would never have contemplated on her own. He was unlike any man she had ever known, driven by purpose, haunted by loss, yet capable of unexpected gentleness. And tomorrow, their strange partnership would face its greatest test. Either they would succeed in exposing Theodore Wellington's crimes and recovering her father's money, or they would fail, possibly at great personal cost. Olivia Blackwood, who had always prided herself on her practical nature, found herself praying for success not just for the sake of her store, but for the man who had awakened something in her that she hadn't known existed: a hunger for justice, for adventure, and perhaps, though she scarcely dared admit it even to herself, for something more. The investment gathering was scheduled for 7 o'clock the following evening. Olivia spent the day in careful preparation, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style and donning her blue silk dress. She added her mother's cameo brooch and a pair of small pearl earrings the extent of her jewelry, and practiced the story she and Samuel had crafted. She was Olivia West, recently widowed, formerly of Denver. Her husband had left her a modest sum, and she was looking to invest wisely to secure her future. She had heard of Mr. Thornton's reputation for finding excellent opportunities and was eager to learn more. By the time she arrived at the Grand Hotel, her heart was pounding so hard she feared it might be visible through her bodice. The lobby was impressive by frontier standards: polished woodwork, a massive stone fireplace, and actual carpeting underfoot. A placard directed investors to the private dining room at the rear of the building. Olivia presented her invitation to the young man stationed at the door and was ushered into a well-appointed room where about 20 people, mostly men, stood in small groups, drinks in hand. A buffet had been arranged along one wall, and a small podium stood at the front of the room. She scanned the gathering, trying to identify Theodore Wellington based on the description Samuel had provided. Her gaze settled on a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and gold-rimmed spectacles, holding court among a group of attentive listeners. His well-tailored suit and confident bearing marked him as someone of importance. Taking a deep breath, Olivia approached the fringe of the group, accepting a glass of sherry from a passing waiter. She listened attentively as the man who was indeed being addressed as Mr. Thornton expounded on the transformative economic impact the railroad would bring to the region. "Property values alone will increase tenfold," he was saying, his voice cultured and persuasive. "Those who secure interests now, before the official announcement, will find themselves in an enviable position indeed." One of the listeners, a balding man with an expensive watch chain, frowned skeptically. "The Northern Pacific has had financial troubles. What makes you so certain they'll extend the line through Cottonwood?" "An excellent question, Mr. Hargrove." Thornton smiled indulgently. "I'm not at liberty to divulge my sources, but let's just say that certain members of the railroad's board are personal acquaintances who value our friendship enough to share information not yet available to the public." It was masterfully done, Olivia thought. The implication of inside knowledge, the hint of privileged connections, the flattery inherent in including his listeners in this exclusive circle of confidence. No wonder her father had been convinced. As the group shifted, Thornton's gaze fell on Olivia. She saw a flicker of surprise, perhaps, at seeing a woman at the gathering, followed by a calculating assessment that made her skin crawl despite his outward courtesy. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," he said, moving toward her with practiced charm. "Olivia West," she replied, extending her hand as they had rehearsed. "I've recently arrived in Cottonwood." He took her fingers in a brief, correct handshake. "William Thornton, at your service. What brings you to our investment discussion, Mrs. West?" Most ladies find financial matters tediously complex. She managed a small smile. "Necessity, Mr. Thornton. My late husband left me with sufficient funds to maintain myself, but I'm interested in securing a more prosperous future." "My condolences on your loss," he said smoothly, though his eyes showed no genuine sympathy. "And my admiration for your foresight. Too many widows allow male relatives to manage their affairs, often to their detriment." "I have no such relatives to rely upon," Olivia replied, the truth of that statement lending authenticity to her performance. "I must make my own decisions. A woman of independence. How refreshing." Thornton gestured toward the front of the room. "We'll be beginning the formal presentation shortly, but perhaps afterward we might discuss some options particularly suited to your circumstances." "I would appreciate that very much." As Thornton moved away to greet new arrivals, Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had gone exactly as planned. She had established contact and planted the seed of her interest in his scheme. She glanced around discreetly, wondering where Samuel was positioned. They had agreed he would remain out of sight until the proper moment, but knowing he was somewhere nearby would have been reassuring. The presentation began promptly at 7:30. Thornton took his place at the podium, commanding the room with the ease of a practiced orator. His speech was a masterpiece of persuasion, painting a vivid picture of the prosperity that would follow the railroad's arrival and the exclusive opportunity he was offering to a select group of forward-thinking investors. "Minimum investment is $5,000, he announced, eliciting murmurs from the audience. "A substantial sum, I acknowledge, but one that promises returns of 30% or more within 18 months. Olivia watched the faces around her, seeing both skepticism and naked greed. Some were clearly unconvinced, but others were practically reaching for their wallets already. She wondered how many would be ruined by this man's false promises. After the formal presentation, Thornton circulated among the potential investors, addressing concerns and offering personalized assurances. Olivia maintained her position near one of the tall windows, waiting for him to approach her as promised. "Mrs. West." His voice came from behind her, startling her slightly. "I trust you found the presentation informative." Olivia turned, composing her features into a mask of interested uncertainty. "Very much so, Mr. Thornton, though I must admit the minimum investment is somewhat daunting." He smiled benevolently. "The greater the risk, the greater the reward, Mrs. West, but perhaps we could discuss a special arrangement for a lady in your situation." He gestured toward a small seating area in a quiet corner. "Shall we?" As they moved toward the secluded alcove, Olivia felt a prickle of unease. Where was Samuel? The confrontation was supposed to happen during the public gathering, not in a private conversation where she would be more vulnerable. "I understand your hesitation," Thornton was saying as they sat down. "A woman alone must be cautious with her resources. But I assure you, this opportunity is as secure as any investment could be." "And how many others have you given such assurances to, Mr. Thornton? Or should I say Mr. Wellington? Or perhaps Mr. Harrington?" The words came not from Olivia, but from a deep voice behind them. Samuel stood there, his tall frame imposing in a dark suit that made him look more like a businessman than a cowboy. Only his eyes, hard as flint, betrayed the depth of his emotion. Thornton's reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a momentary freezing of his pleasant expression before it reasserted itself. "I beg your pardon. There seems to be some confusion." "No confusion," Samuel replied, moving to stand beside Olivia. "Theodore Wellington, James Harrington, William Thornton, different names, same con. You've swindled people across 3 territories, and your game ends tonight." Thornton's eyes darted around the room, assessing potential escape routes and witnesses. The gathering was beginning to disperse, with only a few lingering groups engaged in conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice still controlled but with an edge of steel beneath the polish. "And I suggest you leave before I call for the hotel security." Samuel placed a folded paper on the small table between them. "A warrant for your arrest from Arizona Territory for fraud and murder." At the word murder, something dangerous flickered across Thornton's face. His hand moved subtly toward his pocket. "I wouldn't," Samuel warned, his own hand shifting toward his belt where Olivia knew he carried a pistol beneath his coat. "There are too many witnesses." For a tense moment, no one moved. Olivia held her breath, acutely aware of how quickly the situation could turn violent. Then Thornton smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "An interesting accusation, but you'll find it difficult to prove. I have influential friends in this town, Mr. Stone, Samuel Stone." Recognition dawned in Thornton's eyes. "Ah, the brother. I wondered if you might eventually find me." His gaze shifted to Olivia, reassessing her with new understanding. "And you, my dear, are certainly not Olivia West, are you?" "Olivia Blackwood," she replied, lifting her chin. "Harold Blackwood's daughter." "Harold." Thornton paused, searching his memory. "Ah, yes, Silver Creek, the merchant with dreams of silver mines." He shook his head with mock sympathy. "Your father was a poor businessman, Miss Blackwood. He practically begged me to take his money." Anger flared in Olivia's chest. "He trusted you. And you betrayed that trust." "Trust is a luxury for fools," Thornton replied dismissively. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other appointments this evening." As he started to rise, Samuel placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. "You're not going anywhere except to the sheriff's office." Thornton's facade of civility cracked. "Remove your hand, or I'll have you arrested for assault." "I think not," came a new voice. A stocky man in a sheriff's badge approached their table, accompanied by 2 deputies. "William Thornton, or whatever your real name is, I'd like you to come with me. We have some questions about your business practices." Samuel nodded to the lawman. "Sheriff Davis, thank you for your prompt response." "Any friend of Marshal Evanston is a friend of mine," the sheriff replied. "And when he vouched for your story, well, that was good enough for me." Olivia looked at Samuel in surprise. He hadn't mentioned contacting a marshal. Thornton's expression hardened as he realized he was outmaneuvered. "This is absurd. I've committed no crime in Cottonwood." "Perhaps not," Sheriff Davis acknowledged, "but that warrant from Arizona looks legitimate enough to hold you while we sort things out." He nodded to his deputies. "Gentlemen." As the deputies moved to take Thornton into custody, the con man suddenly lunged forward, shoving the table toward Samuel and Olivia. In the moment of confusion, he pulled a small derringer from his pocket and aimed it directly at Samuel. Several things happened at once. Olivia cried out a warning. Samuel reached for his own weapon. Sheriff Davis drew his revolver, and a shot rang out, deafening in the confined space of the dining room. Thornton staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as a crimson stain spread across the front of his expensive waistcoat. But the shot had come from neither Samuel nor the sheriff. Standing in the doorway, pistol still raised, was a woman Olivia had never seen before, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "That," the woman said in a voice that carried across the now silent room, was for what you did to my husband and the others you ruined in Deadwood." Before anyone could react, Thornton raised his derringer again, this time aiming at the woman. Samuel moved with surprising speed, tackling Olivia to the ground as another shot echoed through the room. When Olivia dared to look up, Thornton lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Sheriff Davis stood over him, smoke still curling from the barrel of his revolver. "Everyone all right?" the sheriff asked gruffly. Samuel helped Olivia to her feet, his hands gentle but firm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," she managed, though her heart was racing and her knees felt weak. "I'm fine." The silver-haired woman approached them, her composure remarkable given what had just occurred. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance," she said, her accent suggesting Eastern education. "But when I heard this man was in Cottonwood, I couldn't stay away. He ruined my husband, drove him to suicide. I've been tracking him for months." Sheriff Davis sighed heavily. "That makes 3 of you after the same man. I don't suppose any of you thought to notify me before tonight." "My apologies, Sheriff," Samuel said. "We weren't certain of his identity until today." As the deputies cleared the room of shocked onlookers and a doctor was summoned to officially pronounce Thornton dead, Olivia found herself trembling with delayed reaction. Samuel noticed immediately, guiding her to a chair and kneeling beside her. "It's over," he said softly. "He can't hurt anyone else now." Olivia nodded, unable to form words. The evening had unfolded in ways she could never have anticipated, and the violence of its conclusion had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The silver-haired woman who introduced herself as Margaret Atherton, widow of a Deadwood banker, joined them. "Mr. Stone, Miss Blackwood, I owe you both an apology. I didn't intend matters to end this way." "No apology necessary, Mrs. Atherton," Samuel replied. "You may have saved my life." Sheriff Davis approached their small group. "I'll need statements from all of you, and I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to remain in town until the circuit judge arrives next week. He'll want to review this matter personally." They agreed to meet at the sheriff's office the following morning. As they left the hotel, the night air cool against Olivia's flushed face, Samuel kept a protective hand at her elbow. "I'll walk you back to your boarding house," he said. "You've had enough excitement for one evening." "That's an understatement," she replied, finding her voice at last. "I don't think any novel I've ever read prepared me for something like this." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Reality rarely follows the neat patterns of fiction. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the events of the evening settling between them like a shared secret. "What happens now?" Olivia finally asked as they approached Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. Samuel's expression turned thoughtful. "We give our statements, wait for the judge's ruling, and search Thornton's belongings for any record of his victims and their investments." "Do you think we'll find my father's money?" "Some of it, perhaps, though I suspect much of what he stole has been spent on maintaining his elaborate facade." He hesitated. "My offer still stands, Olivia. I can help you satisfy your bank obligations." In the glow of the street lamp, his face was cast in shadows, but his eyes were sincere. Olivia found herself wondering what it would be like to accept his help, to be indebted to this man who had already changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Let's see what we find first," she said softly. "But, thank you." They had reached the boarding house steps. Samuel removed his hat, holding it almost awkwardly in his hands. "You showed remarkable courage tonight, Olivia Blackwood." "As did you." She looked up at him, suddenly reluctant to say good night. "Will I see you tomorrow at the sheriff's office?" "Yes, I'll come for you at 10 o'clock if that suits." "It does." For a moment they stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Then Samuel cleared his throat. "Good night, then. Try to rest." "Good night, Sam." As she watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the darkness, Olivia realized that while Theodore Wellington's reign of deception had ended, something else, something unexpected and potentially life-changing, was just beginning. The next 3 days passed in a blur of official statements, legal procedures, and the methodical examination of Theodore Wellington's possessions. His real name, they discovered from papers in his hotel room, was Edward Thorne, a former bank clerk from Philadelphia who had embarked on his life of fraud after being dismissed for embezzlement. Among his effects were meticulously kept records of his various schemes and victims, a dangerous collection that would have been damning evidence had he lived to stand trial, but which now proved invaluable in understanding the scope of his crimes. Olivia found her father's name in a small leather notebook, alongside a notation for $3,200, nearly everything Harold Blackwood had managed to save over 15 years of running the mercantile. The sight of it, written in Wellington's elegant hand with no more emotion than a grocery list, brought tears to her eyes. "He kept track of everything," Samuel observed grimly as they sat in the sheriff's office reviewing the documents. Names, amounts, even notes about what dreams or desires he exploited to gain their trust. Next to Harold Blackwood's name was written, "Daughter's future education back east." The revelation that her father had been trying to provide for her education, something they had discussed when she was younger, but had set aside as impractical, made the betrayal even more painful. He hadn't been gambling or pursuing some selfish dream. He had been trying to give her opportunities beyond Silver Creek. Sheriff Davis had arranged for a bank representative to inventory the cash and valuables found in Wellington's possession. The total amounted to just over $12,000, a considerable sum, but far less than the estimated $50,000 he had stolen from his various victims. "The judge has ordered the recovered funds to be distributed proportionally among the identified victims," the sheriff explained. "Based on Mr. Blackwood's investment, that would mean about $750 returned to you, Miss Blackwood." It was better than nothing, but not nearly enough to save the store. Olivia accepted the news with outward composure, though inside she felt a renewed sense of despair. All this, the journey, the confrontation, the violence, and still she would return to Silver Creek facing foreclosure. Samuel found her later that afternoon sitting alone on a bench outside the sheriff's office, her face tilted toward the sun but her thoughts clearly far away. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, making room beside her. $750, she said without preamble. "Less than a quarter of what my father lost." "I know." Samuel sat beside her, his hat in his hands. "I'm sorry, Olivia. It's not your fault. At least now I know the truth about what happened, and my father's name is cleared, at least in my mind." She sighed. "I just don't know what I'll do when I return to Silver Creek." Samuel was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "What if you didn't have to return right away?" She looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" Wellington Thorne, whatever his name was, he had other victims. In Helena, in Deadwood, in a dozen other towns. Mrs. Atherton and I have been discussing the possibility of trying to recover more of the stolen funds. How? By tracking his movements over the past year. He must have converted some of the money into property, investments, bank deposits under various names, with the information in his notebooks and Mrs. Atherton's connections. Her late husband was quite prominent in banking circles. We might be able to recover more than what was found in his hotel room. Hope flickered in Olivia's chest, quickly tempered by practicality. "That could take months, Sam." I have less than 3 weeks before the bank forecloses, which brings me back to my offer. He turned to face her fully. Let me help you, Olivia, not as charity but as an investment in your future, in the future of Silver Creek. Why would you do that? She asked, searching his face. You hardly know me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. I know enough. I know you're brave and determined and fiercely loyal to your father's legacy. I know you're willing to risk everything for what's right. He paused. And I know that for the first time since Sarah died, I've found someone I care about. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks, her heart suddenly racing. Sam, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted quickly. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. Just let me help you secure your store. What comes after? That's for time to decide. Olivia studied him, this man who had entered her life like a whirlwind just days ago. Could she trust him? Could she accept his help without compromising her independence? And what of these new feelings stirring within her, feelings that had nothing to do with practicality, and everything to do with the way his presence made her pulse quicken? All right, she said finally. But as a proper business arrangement, with terms and interest as we discussed before. Relief and something warmer flashed across his features. Of course, we'll draw up a formal agreement before we return to Silver Creek. When will that be? The circuit judge arrives in 2 days. After he reviews our statements and makes his ruling on the distribution of Wellington's assets, we should be free to leave. Samuel hesitated. Unless you'd like to join Mrs. Atherton and me in pursuing the rest of the stolen funds. The invitation was tempting: more adventure, more time with Samuel, more possibility of recovering her father's money. But Silver Creek and the mercantile were her responsibilities, her home. I need to return, she said with genuine regret. The store has been closed for nearly a week already. Any longer and I might not have customers to return to. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'll leave as soon as the judge releases us. As they sat side by side on the bench, a comfortable silence settling between them, Olivia realized how much had changed in the space of a week. She had left Silver Creek as a shopkeeper's daughter facing financial ruin. She would return still facing challenges, but with new allies, new knowledge, and perhaps most surprisingly, new feelings that she had previously encountered only in the pages of her cherished novels. The circuit judge arrived in Cottonwood 2 days later as promised. Judge Harmon was a formidable figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate and pass judgment with a single glance. He reviewed the statements and evidence with methodical thoroughness, questioning each witness personally. When it was Olivia's turn to be interviewed, she found herself recounting the entire story from the beginning: her father's death, Samuel's arrival in Silver Creek, their journey to Cottonwood, and the final confrontation with Wellington. And you say this man swindled your father out of his life savings? The judge asked, peering at her over half-moon spectacles. Yes, Your Honor. $3,200, according to the records we found among Mr. Wellington's or Mr. Thorne's possessions. Judge Harmon made a note in his ledger. A substantial sum. And what do you intend to do with your portion of the recovered funds, Miss Blackwood? Try to save my father's store, sir, though I'm afraid $750 won't be sufficient to clear the debt. The judge studied her for a moment. Your father was Harold Blackwood of Silver Creek. Surprised, Olivia nodded. Yes, sir. I knew him slightly, purchased supplies from his store whenever the circuit took me through that way. A hint of sympathy softened the judge's stern features. He was an honest businessman, one of the few who didn't try to overcharge the circuit court for services. "That sounds like my father," Olivia said softly. Judge Harmon made another note, then dismissed her with a nod. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood. That will be all for now." The judge spent the remainder of the day interviewing Samuel, Mrs. Atherton, Sheriff Davis, and the other witnesses to the events at the Grand Hotel. By evening, he had reached his decisions. In the matter of Edward Thorne, also known as Theodore Wellington, James Harrington, and William Thornton, Judge Harmon announced from behind the sheriff's desk, "I find that his death occurred as a result of justifiable use of force by Sheriff Davis in the protection of citizens under imminent threat." There was a collective sigh of relief from those gathered in the office. Regarding the distribution of the recovered funds, the judge continued, "I am ordering that all identifiable victims be compensated proportionally according to their documented losses, as previously determined. However," he added, looking directly at Olivia, "in the case of Harold Blackwood's estate, I am assigning an additional $500 from the unclaimed portion of the recovered assets in recognition of Miss Blackwood's assistance in bringing this criminal to justice." Olivia gasped softly. With this addition, she would receive $1,250, still not enough to clear the entire debt, but a significant improvement. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The judge nodded. "You're free to return to Silver Creek, Miss Blackwood. I've instructed the bank to release your funds tomorrow morning." As the small gathering dispersed, Samuel touched Olivia's elbow lightly. "That was unexpected. A blessing," she agreed, "though still not enough." "My offer stands," he reminded her quietly. She looked up at him, seeing sincerity in his gray eyes. "I know, and I'm grateful, Sam, truly." They collected their funds from the bank the following morning and made preparations to depart for Silver Creek. Mrs. Atherton, who had taken a surprising liking to both of them, insisted on hosting a small dinner at the hotel before they left. "To celebrate justice," she declared, raising her glass, "and to new friendships forged in adversity." Over a meal finer than any Olivia had enjoyed in years, they discussed the future. Mrs. Atherton would continue pursuing Wellington's assets with the help of her late husband's banking connections. Samuel would assist her initially, then join Olivia in Silver Creek. "I have some business to conclude in Helena first," he explained, "but I should arrive in Silver Creek within 2 weeks." Olivia felt both disappointment at the delay and a fluttering anticipation at the thought of seeing him again. Their relationship had evolved beyond their original partnership, but into what exactly, she wasn't certain. There had been no declarations, no promises beyond his offer of financial assistance. Yet something unspoken hummed between them whenever their eyes met. They departed Cottonwood at dawn the next day, retracing their route through the Montana wilderness. The journey that had taken nearly 2 days on their arrival passed more quickly on the return, perhaps because they were now comfortable in each other's company, or perhaps because the urgency of Wellington's pursuit had been replaced by a different kind of anticipation. They talked more freely on this journey about Samuel's childhood in Tennessee, about Olivia's dreams of someday expanding the mercantile, about books they had read and places they hoped to see. In the evenings, they shared simple meals beside the campfire, their conversations extending into the night as stars wheeled overhead. On their final evening before reaching Silver Creek, as they sat beside the dying embers of their fire, Samuel finally spoke of his sister. "Sarah was always the smart one," he said, his voice soft with memory. "Could have been anything she wanted, doctor, lawyer if they'd allowed women to practice. But she loved teaching, loved opening young minds to possibilities." Olivia listened, honored by his willingness to share this pain. "After she died, I was lost, Consumed by finding her killer, it became my only purpose. He looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze across the fire. But these past 2 weeks with you, I've started to remember there's more to life than vengeance, more to living than just surviving. The vulnerability in his expression made Olivia's heart ache. Without thinking, she moved around the fire to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Your sister would be proud of you," she said softly. "You brought her killer to justice. You prevented him from harming others." Samuel's fingers tightened around hers. "I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands joined, the weight of all they had experienced together settling around them like a comfortable blanket. "What will you do now?" Olivia finally asked. "After you've helped Mrs. Atherton and come to Silver Creek," he turned to face her, his expression serious but gentle. "That depends in part on you. On me, Olivia." He took both her hands in his. "I came to Silver Creek seeking justice and found something I never expected." Someone I never expected. Her breath caught in her throat. "Sam, let me finish," he said softly. "I know we've known each other only a short time. I know you value your independence, your father's legacy. I'm not asking you to change any of that, but I am asking for a chance. A chance to see if what I feel for you, what I hope you might feel for me, could grow into something permanent." Olivia stared at him, her practical nature warring with the undeniable emotion his words stirred within her. It was too soon, too fast, too improbable. The shopkeeper's daughter and the avenging brother, finding love amid loss and deception. Yet hadn't she always secretly yearned for precisely this kind of unexpected romance? The kind she read about in her novels but never truly believed could happen to someone like her. "Sam," she began again, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that meeting you has changed me in ways I'm still discovering. And I would very much like to explore those changes together." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Their first kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Olivia answered by sliding her hand to the nape of his neck, drawing him closer. His arms encircled her waist, solid and secure, as the kiss deepened into something that spoke of possibilities and promises yet to be made. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be in Silver Creek as soon as I can," he murmured. 2 weeks at most." Olivia nodded, suddenly reluctant to return to her old life without him. "I'll be waiting." They arrived in Silver Creek the following afternoon to find the town much as they had left it, dusty, quiet, and seemingly unchanged. Yet for Olivia, everything was different. She carried with her not just the funds to help save her father's store, but a newfound confidence and the warm promise of Samuel's imminent return. Jenny Tolliver had kept the mercantile running smoothly in Olivia's absence, even managing to sell several of the old quilts at surprisingly good prices. The townspeople greeted Olivia's return with curiosity, and not a little gossip about her unexplained absence in the company of a stranger. "Let them talk," she told Samuel as he prepared to continue on to Helena. "I know the truth, and soon they will too." Standing outside the mercantile, his horse saddled and ready for the journey, Samuel took her hands in his. 2 weeks, he promised again. "Less if I can manage it." "Be careful," she said, squeezing his fingers. "Mrs. Atherton can be quite persuasive. Don't let her talk you into any dangerous pursuits." He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made her heart skip. "The only pursuit that interests me now leads right back here." He brushed a soft kiss across her lips, heedless of potential observers. "Take care of yourself, Olivia Blackwood. And you, Samuel Stone." She stood on the boardwalk, watching until his tall figure disappeared from view, then turned back to the mercantile with renewed determination. She had a store to save, a reputation to maintain, and a future to prepare for one that now held possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity. Olivia used the recovered funds to make a substantial payment to the bank, convincing Mr. Whitfield to extend her loan terms on the remaining balance. She ordered new inventory, cleaned and reorganized the store, and even hired Jenny Tolliver part-time to help manage the increased business. Word of her confrontation with the notorious swindler spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, transforming her in the eyes of the townspeople from poor Harold's plain daughter to a woman of courage and resolve. Even Martha Jenkins, who had been so quick to suggest marriage to Edgar Peterson as Olivia's only option, now spoke of her with reluctant admiration. "Such spirit," Martha told her friends over tea. "Who would have thought our quiet Miss Blackwood had it in her?" Olivia smiled to herself when these comments reached her ears. She had always had it in her, the determination, the intelligence, the capacity for adventure. She had simply needed the right circumstances and perhaps the right person to bring those qualities to the surface. As the days passed and the second week of Samuel's absence began, Olivia found herself watching the road from Helena with increasing frequency. She told herself not to worry. The business in Helena might have taken longer than expected, or he might have encountered delays on the trail. Still, she couldn't help the flutter of anxiety that grew with each passing day. 16 days after his departure, Olivia was closing the store for the evening when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up, hope surging, to see a rider silhouetted against the setting sun. But it wasn't Samuel. It was a young man she didn't recognize, dust-covered and trail-weary, who dismounted and approached the mercantile with purposeful strides. "Miss Blackwood?" he asked, removing his hat. "Yes," she replied, her heart suddenly pounding with apprehension. "Name's Riley, madam. Courier from Helena." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew an envelope. "Paid to deliver this to you personal." Olivia took the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing Samuel's handwriting on the front. "Thank you," she murmured, pressing a coin into the young man's hand. "There's a good livery down the street if you need accommodations for the night." Riley tipped his hat and led his horse away, leaving Olivia alone with the letter. She retreated into the store, locking the door behind her before breaking the seal. The letter was dated 10 days earlier, written from Helena. "Dearest Olivia, I hope this finds you well and the mercantile flourishing under your capable hands. I had intended to return to Silver Creek by now, but circumstances have arisen that require my attention here in Helena a while longer. Mrs. Atherton has made remarkable progress in tracing Wellington's assets. Through her late husband's banking connections, she has uncovered evidence of substantial deposits in banks across the territory, all under various aliases. More importantly, we have discovered that your father was not his only victim in Silver Creek. Mayor Jenkins, I regret to inform you, also invested heavily in Wellington's fraudulent mining venture. Unlike your father, however, he used public funds entrusted to him as town treasurer. He now faces exposure and possible criminal charges when the territorial auditor arrives next month. I believe this information may be relevant to your situation with the bank, as Jenkins sits on the board that approved the foreclosure proceedings against your property. Mrs. Atherton and I are working to recover as much of the stolen funds as possible, including those belonging to Silver Creek's treasury. I ask for your patience and discretion. Do not confront Jenkins or mention this matter to anyone until I return. I anticipate this business will be concluded within another week, at which time I will bring with me documentation that should secure not only the future of your store, but your standing in the community. Until then, please know that you are in my thoughts constantly. Our journey together has changed me in ways I am still discovering, and I look forward to continuing that journey upon my return. With deepest affection, Samuel. Olivia read the letter twice, her mind reeling with its implications. Mayor Jenkins, one of the town's most respected citizens, had embezzled public funds and lost them to Wellington's scheme. It seemed incredible, yet it explained the mayor's unusual interest in her father's financial troubles and his wife's persistent attempts to push Olivia toward marriage with Edgar Peterson. If Jenkins faced financial ruin and possible imprisonment, he would have been desperate to cover his misdeeds by any means necessary, including forcing Olivia to sell the mercantile to someone who might help conceal his crime. The revelation cast the past months in an entirely new light. Her father hadn't been the only victim in this tangled web of deception, and Olivia wasn't the only one facing an uncertain future because of Wellington's crimes. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket, her practical mind already considering the implications for her negotiations with the bank. If Mr. Whitfield knew that one of his board members was compromised, would that strengthen her position? Or would the bank close ranks to protect its own? These questions occupied her thoughts as she prepared for bed, along with concern for Samuel. His letter had been written 10 days ago. What had happened in the interim? Was he still in Helena, or perhaps already on his way to Silver Creek? Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, her mind filled with possibilities both hopeful and worrying. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were a confused jumble of Wellington's cold smile, Samuel's warm embrace, and her father's voice urging her to be strong. 4 more days passed with no word from Samuel. Olivia maintained her outward composure, running the store with her usual efficiency while privately growing more concerned with each passing hour. She had nearly convinced herself to hire a rider to take a message to Helena when the sound of horses, multiple horses, drew her attention one late afternoon. She stepped onto the boardwalk, shading her eyes against the westering sun, to see a small cavalcade approaching from the east. At its head rode a familiar tall figure that made her heart leap in her chest. Samuel had returned, but not alone. Beside him rode an elegantly dressed woman whom Olivia recognized as Mrs. Atherton, and behind them came 2 men in the distinctive uniforms of territorial marshals. The small procession continued past the mercantile toward the town hall, but Samuel reined in his mount when he saw Olivia standing there. He dismounted in one fluid motion and crossed to her in long strides, his face alight with something more than the simple pleasure of seeing her again. "Olivia," he said, taking her hands in his, "I apologize for the delay. Matters in Helena proved more complex than anticipated." "Your letter arrived," she replied, drinking in the sight of him, his face more tanned than before, his eyes bright with purpose. "About Mayor Jenkins." He nodded grimly. "That's why we're here. The marshals have a warrant for his arrest, and Mrs. Atherton has documentation of the misappropriated funds." His expression softened. "But that's not all we discovered. Walk with me." Curious, Olivia called to Jenny to mind the store and fell into step beside Samuel as he led her toward the small church at the edge of town, where they could speak privately. Wellington or Thorne kept detailed records of all his transactions, Samuel explained as they walked, including copies of agreements signed by his victims. Your father's was among them. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, handing it to Olivia. Read it carefully. The agreement was written in Wellington's elegant hand, detailing the terms of a partnership in the Silver Summit mining venture. Harold Blackwood had indeed invested $3,200, as they already knew. But the final clause of the agreement made Olivia's breath catch. In the event that the undersigned partner, Harold Blackwood, should become deceased or otherwise incapacitated prior to the distribution of profits from said venture, all rights and interests shall pass to his daughter and sole heir, Olivia Blackwood, including any real property acquired in pursuit of the venture's aims. "I don't understand," Olivia said, looking up at Samuel. "What real property?" "That's what took us so long to discover," Samuel replied, a hint of triumph in his voice. "Wellington used your father's money combined with funds from his other victims to purchase an actual silver mine. Not the worthless claim he described to his investors, but a producing mine near Butte that he acquired under yet another alias." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "Are you saying—" "The man was a swindler but also a shrewd businessman. He used stolen money to acquire legitimate assets, which he then controlled through an elaborate network of false identities and legal proxies." Samuel's expression was one of grim satisfaction. "Mrs. Atherton's banking connections helped us trace the ownership back to Wellington. And according to that agreement in your hand, your father's investment entitles you to a portion of the mine's ownership." "How much?" Olivia asked, her mind struggling to grasp the implications. "Based on your father's percentage of the total investment, approximately 15% of the mine, which, according to the current production reports, represents an income of roughly $300 per month." The sum was staggering more than enough to clear her debts, secure the store's future, and provide a comfortable living besides. Olivia felt her knees weaken, and Samuel's arm went around her waist to steady her. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It is." His voice was warm with shared joy. "The territorial court has already validated the claim. The marshals brought the official documentation with them." He guided her to a bench beneath the church's lone oak tree. "Your father's final investment, which you believed had ruined you, has instead secured your future." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, tears of relief, of vindication for her father, of overwhelming gratitude. "He would be so pleased," she managed through the tightness in her throat. "Not about the money, but to know that his judgment wasn't as flawed as we thought, that he really was trying to provide for me." "He succeeded," Samuel said softly, taking her hand. "Perhaps not in the way he intended, but succeeded nonetheless." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the magnitude of this revelation settle between them. In the distance, they could see activity at the town hall, people gathering, voices raised, the marshal's presence creating a stir that would soon transform Silver Creek. "What will happen to Mayor Jenkins?" Olivia asked. "He'll face charges of embezzlement at minimum. The territorial prosecutor believes he may have been aware of Wellington's true nature, but looked the other way in hopes of profiting from the scheme." Samuel's expression hardened. "He won't be in a position to pressure you or anyone else again." Olivia nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. The mayor's subtle influence had extended throughout Silver Creek, affecting everything from bank decisions to social standing. His removal would reshape the town's dynamics in ways yet to be determined. "And what about you, Sam?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "What happens now that your quest is complete? Now that Wellington is gone and his victims are receiving justice?" It was the question that had lingered in her mind throughout his absence, whether the connection they had formed was tied to their shared purpose, or if it could survive beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Samuel's gaze softened as it met hers. "Now," he said, his voice low and certain, "I begin a new chapter, if you'll have me." "What does that mean?" Olivia asked, her heart suddenly racing. In answer, Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know it soon," he said, a hint of nervousness beneath his usual confidence. "Too soon, perhaps, by conventional standards, but our acquaintance has been anything but conventional from the start." He opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small diamond into his palm. "This was my mother's. I've carried it since Sarah died, thinking someday I might find someone to give it to. Someone who embodied the same courage, intelligence, and compassion that my sister and mother both possessed." He took Olivia's hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't expect to find that person in Silver Creek. I didn't expect to find you, Olivia Blackwood. But now that I have, I can't imagine continuing my journey without you beside me." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. This man, this complex, honorable, unexpected man was offering her not just his heart, but a future neither of them could have anticipated when they first met. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," Samuel continued. "I understand you have the store to consider, your place in this community, the new responsibilities that come with your inheritance. All I'm asking is the chance to build something together, at whatever pace feels right to you." He held out the ring, a question in his eyes. "Will you consider it?" "Consider me." Olivia looked at the simple ring gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight, then at the man offering it. In the space of a month, he had upended her carefully ordered existence, challenged her practical nature, and shown her possibilities she had previously encountered only in the pages of novels. Yet, unlike the overwrought romances she had read, this was real as the warm breeze stirring the oak leaves above them, as real as the solid bench beneath them, as real as the steady beat of her heart as it recognized what her mind was only beginning to accept. "Yes," she said, the word emerging with quiet certainty. "I'll consider it. I'll consider you." She smiled, reaching out to close his fingers around the ring. "But keep this safe for now. When the time is right, when we're both sure, then ask me again." Relief and joy transformed Samuel's features. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I can be patient," he murmured against her skin, "now that I know the journey leads to you." As the sun began to set over Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the churchyard, Olivia Blackwood, shopkeeper's daughter, victim's advocate, mine owner, leaned her head against the shoulder of the man who had shown her that love wasn't just found in stories after all. It was found in courage and honesty, in shared purpose and mutual respect, in the unexpected crossing of two paths that might never have met if not for one man's deception and another's quest for justice. And as Samuel's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer in a silent promise of all that was to come, Olivia knew that whatever chapters they wrote together would be far more compelling than any novel she had ever read, because they would be real, and they would be theirs. Epilogue. Spring 1877. The bell above the door of Blackwood Mercantile jangled merrily as a customer entered, bringing with them the scent of apple blossoms and fresh spring air. Olivia looked up from the ledger she was balancing, a smile already forming on her lips. "Just on time," she observed as Samuel crossed the polished wooden floor to the counter where she worked. "I was beginning to think the meeting with the mine manager had run long." "It did," he replied, leaning across the counter to press a quick kiss to her cheek. "But I rode back at a pace that would have made you scold me for pushing midnight too hard." "Then I won't ask how quickly you made the journey from Butte," she said with a knowing look. "What news from the mine?" Samuel's eyes lit with satisfaction. "Production is up 20% from last quarter. The new equipment is already proving its worth." He withdrew an envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the counter. "Your share of the profits, Miss Blackwood, as agreed." Olivia took the envelope, still somewhat amazed by the turn her fortunes had taken. In the year since Wellington's death and the discovery of her inheritance, the Silver Summit mine had flourished under proper management. Her 15% ownership had provided enough income to not only save the mercantile, but expand it, adding a new wing for household goods and a small lending library that had quickly become Silver Creek's social center. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," she replied with mock formality. "Your services as my business representative continue to be most satisfactory." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Is that all they are? Satisfactory?" "Perhaps a bit better than satisfactory," she conceded, her own smile widening as she moved from behind the counter. "How long can you stay this time?" "At least a week. The mine is running smoothly, and I've hired a new foreman who seems competent enough to manage without constant supervision." He took her hands in his expression growing more serious. "Which brings me to another matter I wanted to discuss with you." Before he could continue, the bell jangled again, and Martha Jenkins entered the store. The former mayor's wife had undergone a remarkable transformation since her husband's arrest and subsequent conviction. Stripped of her social position and much of her fortune, she had been forced to take up seamstress work to support herself. The experience had humbled her considerably. "Good afternoon, Miss Blackwood," she greeted, nodding politely to Samuel. "I've finished the alterations on those dresses for Mrs. Miller's daughters. Might I leave them here for her to collect?" "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. And I have that bolt of calico you asked about last week. It arrived on yesterday's supply wagon." As Olivia assisted Martha with her business, Samuel browsed the store, pausing to chat with young Jenny Tolliver, who had become a permanent fixture behind the counter. The 16-year-old had proven to have a natural aptitude for commerce, and was now being trained by Olivia to manage more significant aspects of the business. When Martha departed with her calico and payment for her sewing work, Samuel returned to Olivia's side. "You've transformed this place," he observed, looking around at the well-stocked shelves, polished floors, and new glass display cases. "Your father would be proud." "I like to think so," she agreed, a familiar pang of bittersweetness accompanying thoughts of Harold Blackwood. "Though sometimes I wish he could have seen it himself." "He saw the most important part," Samuel said softly. "He saw your strength, your determination. That's why he tried so hard to secure your future." Olivia nodded, grateful as always for Samuel's understanding. In the months since his return to Silver Creek, he had become not just her business partner and suitor, but her closest confidant. They had taken their time getting to know each other properly, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than the heightened emotions of their initial adventure. "You mentioned something you wanted to discuss," she prompted, remembering his earlier comment. "Yes." He glanced around the busy store, but perhaps somewhere more private. Curious, Olivia led him through the back room and up the stairs to her living quarters above the mercantile. The small apartment had also been transformed over the past year, with new curtains, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves filled with volumes that reflected her continuing love of literature and her new interest in business management. "Tea," she offered, moving toward the small stove. "No, thank you." Samuel seemed uncharacteristically nervous, pacing the small sitting room before finally taking a seat on the sofa. "Olivia, I've been thinking about the future, our future." She sat beside him, her heart quickening at his serious tone. "As have I. The mine is stable now. The mercantile is thriving. The circumstances that brought us together have been resolved." He took her hands in his gray eyes intent on her face. "Which means we're free to decide what comes next, based not on necessity or crisis, but on what we truly want." Olivia felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. Over the past year, their courtship had progressed with a deliberate pace that had sometimes tested her patience. Samuel had been adamant about giving her time to be certain, about establishing himself as more than just the man who had helped her in a time of need. "And what is it that you want, Sam?" she asked softly. In answer, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a familiar velvet pouch, the same one he had shown her beneath the oak tree a year earlier. "I want what I've wanted since I first saw you truly smile," he said, his voice low and certain. "I want to build a life with you, Olivia Blackwood. A life that honors both our pasts but isn't defined by them." He opened the pouch and once again tipped his mother's ring into his palm. "I told you I would ask again when the time was right, when we were both sure. I'm sure, Olivia, I love you. Not just for your courage or your intelligence or your determination, though I admire all those things. I love you for the quiet moments, for your laughter, for the way you see possibilities where others see only obstacles." Emotion tightened Olivia's throat as she watched this man, this strong, honorable man who had traveled so far from vengeance to love, offer his heart to her without reservation. "I'm sure too," she whispered, her voice catching. "I love you, Samuel Stone, for showing me that real love isn't like the novels I used to read. It's better. It's real and complicated and sometimes difficult, but always, always worth fighting for." Samuel's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "Then you'll marry me, be my wife, my partner, my home." "Yes," Olivia said, the single syllable containing all the certainty in her heart. "Yes to all of it." He gathered her into his arms then, his kiss a promise and a beginning all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Olivia rested her forehead against his. "What about the mine? And the mercantile?" she asked practically, though her heart was soaring with happiness. "We can't be in two places at once." Samuel chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest where her hand rested. "Always the practical one," he teased gently. "I've been considering that. What would you think about hiring a manager for the store? Someone like Jenny, perhaps, when she's a bit older and more experienced. And live in Butte." Olivia considered the possibility. The growing mining town offered opportunities that Silver Creek couldn't match, yet she was reluctant to leave the community that had been her home all her life. "Not necessarily," Samuel said. "I was thinking we might split our time. A house here, an apartment in Butte. The railroad makes travel between the two relatively simple now." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Or we could sell the mine interest, invest the proceeds, and stay here permanently. The mercantile could be the center of our business interests." The fact that he was willing to adapt his life to accommodate her attachments only confirmed what Olivia already knew, that this man, who had entered her life in search of justice, had found something far more valuable in the process. And so had she. "We don't have to decide everything today," she said, smiling up at him. "We have time." "Yes," he agreed, drawing her close again. "We have all the time in the world." As afternoon sunlight streamed through the window of the apartment above Blackwood Mercantile, illuminating two people who had found in each other something neither had been looking for, Olivia thought of how far she had come from that desperate day when Samuel Stone first walked into her store. From a shopkeeper's daughter facing ruin to a businesswoman with prospects. From a practical young woman who believed love existed only in stories to a woman who had discovered that the greatest stories were the ones written by life itself. And as Samuel's arms tightened around her, secure and promising. She knew that their story, unusual in its beginning, steadfast in its middle, was only just reaching its true start. The chapters to come would be written together, page by page, day by day, with the same courage and honesty that had brought them to this moment. It wasn't the ending of a novel. It was the beginning of a life. And that, Olivia Blackwood decided as she leaned up to kiss her future husband once more, was the most beautiful story of all.